The rate of new business creation on Stripe in March, it's up almost 2x year over year.
It was one of the early example of AI companies that went from 0 to like 10 million ARR in like a few months, and now it's like a $500 million company. We're gonna see more of those $1 billion kind of single two-person businesses. So there's been incredible acceleration in internet business creation over the past year. Can you share perhaps some of the numbers you're seeing at Stripe and what is this phenomenon exactly? What's happening?
Yeah, I just had lunch with an economist, this guy, Nick Bloom, who wrote this very interesting paper actually about how innovation and productivity growth and so forth, at least on a per person basis, seemed to be declining, and there was this kind of big stagnation that he was trying to explain. Anyway, we're having lunch and we were talking about how that no longer seems to be true. Or productivity is now reaccelerating, and we were specifically talking about how...
For the first time in like decades.
Exactly, yeah. Yes. The great stagnation seems to be over. And we were particularly talking about how there's, like, one of the most, I think, underappreciated economic facts today is entrepreneurship is massively accelerating. And so it's not just something that matters in Silicon Valley or matters, for companies like ours. It matters for, the economy and for economists. And specifically, say from a Stripe standpoint, and Stripe now incorporates a bit more than 25% of all Delaware incorporations. So I think we get kind of a representative sample of just the whole. During March of 2020, April of 2020, so we well into the pandemic, well into lockdowns, I think the rate of new business creation on Stripe was growing at around 50% year over year. So like that's a big year over year change, obviously. And we're all scrambling to keep up with it and so forth. Now, interestingly, after the pandemic, that didn't go back to the previous baseline. So it was coming along happily, suddenly spikes with the lockdowns, and basically just remained there. And even grew slightly.
And that was before AI really
exactly,
took off.
Before AI, before any of that stuff. But it's kind of 22, 23 remained at this new elevated level. But so a 50% jump. But then basically over the last 12-ish months, maybe a tiny bit more, but roughly over the last year, it's massively inflected again. And the rate of new business creation on Stripe in March, so month just gone by, it's up almost 2x year over year.
2x.
And so it's a bigger spike than COVID and the pandemic and the lockdowns. And we don't know exactly why this is. Presumably it's because of AI, but we don't definitively know. But it seems that like whatever's causing this, probably AI, is a bigger tailwind and a bigger kind of pro-entrepreneurship, just a bigger change in the world than the lockdowns and then the pandemic, which is pretty trippy.
And in terms of, you also had a stat around the monetization of startups. So that's happening a lot quicker as well, right?
Yeah, so there's two things I think are pretty interesting here. So one is one might have a theory or a suspicion with this massive boom that it's a lot of kind of lightweight vibe-coded projects and I don't know, maybe it's nice that people are creating them, but they aren't of the same heft and substance that kind of traditional businesses are. But actually, what we're seeing is that even with this huge surge, the average revenue or the average success of any one of these companies has actually increased slightly. So it's almost 2x more, and on like a per instance basis, they seem to be at least as good as any of the past. So that's interesting. And then secondly, they're for the ones that are kind of breakouts or that start achieving some kind of steep revenue ramp. The breakouts are much breaky outier than they used to be, and some of the revenue growth rates. I guess for many of these companies like the labs and you guys and others, it's broadly known. But we're just seeing these kind of unprecedented revenue accelerations.
There was a stat, I want to pull it up, about how about the time to hit some kind of revenue milestone or something like that.
Yes, yeah. I don't know the exact numbers offhand, but what we've looked at is comparing SaaS companies to kind of the SaaS boom era and marketplaces from the marketplace boom era to AI companies of this era. The time to reach these revenue milestones, like $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, even of recurring revenue, it's down by roughly a factor of 2.
Yeah, 20% of startups charge their first customers within 30 days, which is up from 8% in 2020.
Yeah.
How much of this is Silicon Valley versus how much of it is like, is decentralizing and there's like more entrepreneurship in other places?
Yeah, I was looking at this recently, over the weekend actually. So this is I think there's evidence for, you sort of have the Silicon Valley partisans who think that everything is going to be massively agglomerated here, and you have to move to Silicon Valley, and that camp, and then obviously you have whatever the opposite viewpoint, which argues not only is it much more dispersed, but that AI should make it even more dispersed because the barrier to entry everywhere else is even lower. And I think there's some evidence for both of those. So on the one hand, there's a huge surge everywhere. Like the stats we were just discussing in terms of this big year-over-year change, there's a big year-over-year change in basically every country. And it is just empirically much easier to start a business, and those businesses are doing better. It is the case that the crazy breakouts are more likely to be concentrated in Silicon Valley than elsewhere. And even with AI, that concentration is, if anything, growing.
Right.
Now, it's a little bit difficult to interpret that, right? Because many of those companies didn't start in Silicon Valley, and so maybe the story is it's easier than ever to start somewhere else, and then if you start getting meaningful traction, maybe
People
you
still
then
wanna
move
be
to
here.
Silicon. Exactly. Yeah. But no, if you're an entrepreneur in Dubai, or if you're an entrepreneur in Thailand or Japan or Germany or what have you, it is a much better time now than it was 12 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things anecdotally from the entrepreneurs that I talked to that started their businesses on Replit, the cool thing is that there are a lot of businesses that, Silicon Valley has certain bias, like where a lot of the people that start companies are programmers, and there are large parts of the economy that software has not even reached. Like we have this entrepreneur in Europe that built software for ice skating rinks. And it's on its way to becoming a multi-million-dollar business. He's on his own. I don't think anyone in Silicon Valley has ever thought about ice skating rinks.
Yeah. Well, actually, so I want to come back to that in a second and ask about some kind of representative Replit entrepreneurs to kind of tease that out. But the ice skating rink is a nice example of how, sort of tongue-in-cheek, for the last, 7 or 8 years, when people have asked me, what sector of technology I'm excited about, is it drones, is it AI, is it crypto, whatever, I've said it's vertical SaaS. And I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think there is something there where sort of the opportunities of software and the internet and the new ways we can coordinate and new marketplaces and markets that can be enabled and geographic coverage, all those things haven't really been brought to most sectors still, and there's just still a ton of opportunity, which I guess vertical SaaS kind of by definition helps enable. So that really resonates. And I actually wanted to ask you, Replit obviously started out as a learn-to-code platform. I think when I first met you in New York a long time ago, that's obviously what Replit was focused on. Now you're becoming hugely successful for programming generally, for deployment, for building businesses. And so I guess I'm just curious, as you think about businesses built on Replit, what are just a couple of representative examples, or particularly cool ones that you've come across? Just what help put a more specific picture on that.
Right, for sure. We obviously see a lot of Silicon Valley style companies, a lot of YC startups, things like that. But the more exciting thing is domain experts that have a certain insight over their field or something they're working in, that they can suddenly apply software and technology and AI to. We had a teacher during COVID started thinking about education, what he enjoyed as a teacher doing. He's been seeing a lot of teachers quitting their jobs, and ChatGPT had just come out. It was like, okay, how can we use AI to make the teacher's job easier? So he built this product, which he called MagicSchool, that allows teachers to create assignments, grade assignments very quickly, and all of that. And because he knows how the education system works, a lot of the dogma in Silicon Valley tends to be like, don't build tech businesses because they're terrible. It was one of the early example of AI companies that went from 0 to 10 million ARR in a few months, and now it's like a $500 million company.
So it's a $500 million company that was built with Replit.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really awesome. and it feels like otherwise it wouldn't have been built.
Yeah.
Like but not for what happened with AI, what we built with Replit. And I think that's the thing that gets me excited is, people. Everyone has ideas. Everyone goes through life and they see problems in their respective domains, but they didn't have the tools to be able to solve them.
So what do you think? What role does Replit play in the entrepreneurial ecosystem or the business ecosystem in 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I think the generating function that produces the product roadmap on Replit is like removing all the barriers from going from an idea to like a deployed software, and scaled and monetized and successful. So originally it was like, the programming environment was the first barrier, solve that. Then deployment environment, then actually coding as a whole was a barrier. You kind of solved that with Replit Agent. And now we actually did this program recently called Race to Revenue, where we're seeing a lot of startups start on Replit, but we wanted to get closer to them. We wanted them in our office and see them, all of them incorporated on Atlas. And the thing that I noticed about these companies is, it's sort of old wisdom in Silicon Valley. Distribution is everything, right? It's really becoming the problem. It's like, how do I built this thing, like how do I get my first customer? How do I scale from there? So, okay, there's the distribution problem, but there's also just running your business. Did you see the New York Times article about like Medvi, the company that was two-person on track to $1 billion ARR? They built a lot of it on Replit, and I got in touch with Matthew and talked to him about how they use Replit, and it's a very interesting guy. Like, it's like anything. He built a business before, and he had a lot of employees, and he was really frustrated with it. He was like, I just don't like managing people. I'd rather manage agents and AIs, and so he builds a lot. The first thing I noticed about him is like from idea to like prompt on Replit, something up is like 5 minutes. It's like the fastest person to kind of just spin up projects and ideas and things like that. There's a lot of automations that he was building on the back end. He obviously uses Zapier and a lot of other things. But it just got me thinking how much of, after you start getting customers, how much chores there is in running the business. So I'm starting to think about a layer on top of your Replit projects. You're already running your business, your traffic is there, your users are there, your customers are there. Can you launch a marketing campaign really quickly from there? Can you automate your inbound sales process? Can you?
I suspect there's a lot of value to that vertical integration, and for so many third-party tools, there's obviously at some point a step where it has to be it has to be integrated into your code base. It has to be deployed. It has to be tested. It has to be hooked into your observability stack. Who knows? Which, generally speaking, is a point of friction. But for Replit, you can just do that, right? Like that's what you manage.
Yeah.
And so the structural advantage where you can instantly provision and essentially guarantee that these things will work, just because again you have that kind of full control and visibility.
Yeah, my mental model for Replit is like a Nintendo. Like you can buy, like I bought a Steam Deck, and like you install the games, half of them don't work. You still have to, configure them and always tinker with them, and somehow they break sometimes randomly. And but you buy a Nintendo, and yes, you have a lot of other games on the Nintendo, but you're also, play Zelda. It's like the best experience ever because they control everything from the pixels down to the.
I started out as a Lisp programmer, and the central Lisp insight is obviously code should be data, and this kind of reminds me of that because today there's two quite different worlds. There is your code and there's the organization, but with Replit you can kind of squint and imagine a world where the organization is also the code, and the whole thing just becomes fully self-referential and vertically integrated in this very in this very trippy way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the exciting part, and I think we're going to see more of those like billion-dollar kind of single two-person businesses.
So what's in 5 years, 10 years, some medium-term period out? What's the thing the human is doing, like in 10 years, say? So we're extrapolating a lot of model progress. Let's say I am one of the very successful entrepreneurs running a business on Replit. When I log into the dashboard, what's the thing that I'm doing?
Right. I mean, I think it gets pretty philosophical pretty quickly. Like, what is special about humans? My view is that at least the current era of LLMs, and it doesn't look like, it looks like LLMs will just continue to scale with almost the same properties, which is, they're just like still a function of their data, right? That means they're great, machines for doing what already existingly works, but not necessarily what's on the edge of what's possible, what's on the edge of culture. That's why they're not very good at like naming or marketing, things like that. And I think that the role of the human is to like have a sense of what other people want, what's there in the culture. Like, they're like there's an entrepreneur that built like a looks maxing app on Replit. Like ChatGPT would not even know what looks maxing app would be like, and that's like a moment in culture. Yeah. And so a lot of it is about just finding these opportunities and executing on them.
Well, the thing that reminds me of is I'm a fan of Suno, the music generating service. But I wonder a lot, if jazz didn't exist, if that had never been discovered or invented, could Suno create it? Or what would have to be true of a model in order for it to be creatable? Can you express some linear combination of the vectors of music space to kind of describe jazz, again, if jazz didn't exist? And I think the answer in practice today is no. I could be wrong on that.
Okay.
And it's kind of hard to prove because, you would need to use Suno to produce a genre that, in fact, doesn't exist, and it's hard to know if that's like a real genre. So it's kind of hard to demonstrate. But I think it's actually pretty hard to get these models out of their, it's kind of what you're saying, to get them out of their pre-trained distributions.
Yes.
And it's pretty hard to train them to be good at that because, what's a reward function? Like by definition, it's a reward for something that doesn't exist.
It's a closed system.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I think this creativity breaking out of distribution problem is like really a deep one.
You probably think a lot about it with regards to science too, because, Thomas Kuhn, the philosopher of science, talked about this concept of paradigm shifts. And big question for me in AI and science is that if there's an existing research program, I think AI could run it, but could AI do these paradigm shifts? Or do you need someone crazy like Einstein, dreaming on his chair and like falling, or like an apple falling, or like all these serendipitous interactions that create, and maybe that sort of hints at what is really special about humans.
Yeah, I'm really curious about this. And it feels like we'll probably learn the answer to that in the next couple of years. We're sort of on the cusp now of these Erdos problems being solved and so on. So we're the models of decent math are really getting to the frontier. And I think it's a very interesting question. Do they overshoot? And in a couple of years, they're just way beyond the frontier. And to your point, they've invented these completely new fields of math that humans have not even conceived. Or are they somehow the world's best ever contest mathematicians that can kind of operate more effectively than anything else in the framework, but somehow can't frame break? And I'm excited to know the answer.
Yeah. So bringing back to entrepreneurship, you mentioned earlier when you and your brother, I think you tried to start like a couple of startups before Stripe, and kind of Stripe was born out of that. And so now we have all these tools. We have Stripe, Replit. What if maybe try to imagine yourself starting over? What would you go try to build? Like, how would you try to get into entrepreneurship? What's some practical ideas?
Yeah, I have a lot of affinity for the vertical SaaS ideas. That is to say, taking some space that has not been massively amplified and transformed by software and by really bringing it to bear. Or in many domains, there's a really janky, annoying, kludgy 1990s thing that's kind of dominant, but it has a terrible mobile app and it has zero AI support and terrible collaboration features and whatever. And so just going and building the good version for that particular domain. So I think there's still a ton of opportunities there. Yeah. And then I think there's something. I mean, I think this can be a little bit risky, but I think a pretty interesting pattern is what's popular among young people but low status. Obviously, crypto was that back 10 or so years ago. I mean, maybe it's still that to some extent today, but certainly in the past it was, and
such that it's overlooked by
by the incumbents.
By the incumbents.
Yeah. And I mean, even startups as a market were that 15 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Like Stripe sold 2 startups. And we had no competition because nobody else thought that was an important market because we didn't have all the success cases that we now do. So I think those would be I think number 1, just try anything. Number 2, just look for other domains where software hasn't really been brought to bear in an effective way. And then number 3, what is popular among young people but low status?
How big is the opportunity, you think? So Stripe now, I think the transaction volume is like $1.5 trillion. How big could the internet economy get? Like how much opportunity there is?
Oh my goodness. I think, so we sometimes refer to the fraction of global GDP flowing through Stripe, which is on the order of 1.5%. And I mean, I like that because it helps us principally understand just the stakes and the scale, and this is the big leagues. The thing I don't like about talking about it that way is it focuses on the, in a sense, it focuses on the numerator rather than the denominator.
Yes.
You're trying to, well, how do we get to 2.5% or whatever? Right. Whereas actually the question is, well, the global economy is on the order of, 120-ish trillion today. How do we get the global economy to be 250 trillion? Or, I mean, it sounds like a ridiculous word, but how can it be a quadrillion? But how do we, how can things be just in aggregate so much more prosperous and successful than they are today? And, aggregate global GDP per capita is still, on the order of a tenth what it is in the US. And so there's obviously huge opportunities and potential there to just raise aggregate levels. And then of course, US GDP per capita 50 years ago was a tiny fraction of what it is today. And so unless we really screw things up, the world will get to a quadrillion of GDP.
Right.
And it's not even sort of foreordained that it'll get there over some preposterously long period of time. There's no law of physics that says that the global economy can't grow at 5% or 10% a year. And with AI, there's certainly far more compelling opportunities than have existed certainly in either of our lifetimes. And so I don't know, it seems all there for the taking to me.
Want to continue going down that path of questions because I want to make sure people in the audience are, because I think there's a natural tendency to always come up with counterexamples or things to say why not to do something. So there's also this trend of saying that the foundation lab companies are going to be able to capture big part of the at least new business creation, but perhaps the economy. It's there's no reason to compete with ChatGPT because, or Claude because they're just going to roll over us.
Historically, I think it's difficult to reason about the economics of and the marginal value of these products and the pricing of these products as distinct from their just underlying aggregate quantities. And so, without food, there really would not be much economy or humanity, right? It is a truly necessary ingredient in production. And And yet, most of the economy is not captured by food producers, right? Because it's reasonably competitive, and there's some degree of substitution possible, and all the things. And so the idea that AI is going to be hugely important and abundant in the future does not necessarily mean that all the value is going to be captured by these AI labs.
Yeah.
If there is only a single hegemonic AI lab, then that's perhaps a corner case, but it's not where we are today. It doesn't appear to be the trajectory that we're on. And I'm not sure it's even what the labs themselves would want. And of course, there's a second consideration, which is the value of any company is in proportion to what its customers can pay it. And so if there's one company in the economy, that's in fact not a very valuable company.
Yeah, it's a very Marxist argument.
But I get it. It sort of becomes self-defeating.
Right.
So prices and value accrue to that which is scarce.
Right.
Again, it's hard to predict the relative scarcity of all these different inputs and ingredients. But I think it'd be a terrible reason not to start a company because you think that because of some Manichean argument like that that any given company or sector will gobble everything up. That's not how things have worked through history. It's not what I think a reasonable set of predictions from economics would lead you to believe, and I think it's not what the labs themselves want.
Right. And I think one thing about LLMs, and who knows, it might change, but one thing about LLMs, it just feels like a very low-level technology in the same way that compute is. The interface is sort of like Linux, text in, text out, and very commodifiable interface. And the history of LLM progress has been GPT-2 was something only OpenAI could do. I remember 2019, everyone in this town was freaking out about GPT-2. No one else in the world knew what it is. Now you can train it on your phone. You can train a GPT-2-like model on your phone. And so there's like a Moore's Law type progress that's happening in AI, and it feels like the technology is going to be permeating into everything. There's going to be edge inference. There's going to be a lot of open source models. Perhaps it doesn't feel like it right now, but it's hard for me to imagine a world where it's only a few companies that are controlling these AGI-like models that could do everything, and they're also building all the interfaces on top of them. And by the way, I think also that the way people interact with technology, I think part of the argument that the models will just eat everything is that it assumes that everything is the best way to interact with AI is via just like prompt, just put in a prompt and something happens. But I think people would still want interfaces. I think interfaces are a very sort of human thing. They want creative interfaces to be able to interact with software, and there's probably new types of platforms that are going to come up like AR, VR, and I think computing will change a lot, but will change in the same way it has always changed.
Yeah, I think, absolutely, and I think that, maybe a slightly different version of the question would be, and actually this is one I was curious to get your thoughts on, would be, as we transition to a world in which the marginal cost of producing software plummets, maybe asymptotes to close to zero, there's sort of a question of, well, what will determine which software companies are valuable and how valuable they are? And I think it's pretty obviously true that the answer is not that none of them will be. I think the simplest demonstration of this is an exchange. Like an exchange is just a software program, but the value is in the coordination that everyone has chosen to trade there. There's the most liquidity there. You get the best prices, either a buyer or a seller. And so it's not the case, like the hard part of setting up an exchange is not writing the code for the exchange. It's convincing everybody to coordinate around yours rather than somebody else's.
In many ways, the software was maybe there are a few cases of businesses where they built like tremendously like difficult to produce and test software, but for the most cases, I don't think it ever was the moat.
Okay, so I was going to ask you this. To what degree, if at all, do you think in 5 years or 10 years, the shape of moats in software will have changed?
I don't think they will change all that much. One of my favorite books on the subject is Hamler's Seven Powers.
Yep.
And
great book.
Yeah, and it's like there's seven moats, and you go back in history or you try to predict forward in history, and it's you can map these 7 powers on whatever business you study, and typically businesses that are valuable, continue to be valuable and capture a lot of value and maintain their defensive position in the market tend to have one of those moats. Does AI change any of those moats? I don't think so. I think it just makes it so that the pace of competition is really fast, and so you could, and we're already seen this with the early innings of ChatGPT and companies like Jasper and others like that went up really fast and went down really quickly, which is the moment you discover market inefficiency, competition will come in really quickly, and so maybe the main difference is going to be. Maybe that's a little unfortunate, but there's an innovator's dilemma on steroids, where you can get disrupted very quickly, or you can't capture enough value after you made an invention because competition will just pour in quickly. That being said, I think for this is particularly important for Silicon Valley, but I think for the small-time entrepreneur, like the ice rink founder, will probably be okay. I think there's a lot of multi-million-dollar businesses that you can build that there's not going to be a lot of competitors that are coming in because it's just not worth it to capture that. So I think for the long tail of entrepreneurship, I don't think that's going to be a worry. But for Silicon Valley sort of vertical SaaS, I think perhaps vertical SaaS becomes the domain of the long tail as opposed to Silicon Valley.
I think maybe the meta point here would be that through every decade in Silicon Valley, there have been significant overhanging concerns about entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
In the 80s was Japan is going to win at everything.
Right.
And then in the 90s, Microsoft is going to dominate everything.
Yeah.
And then in the 2000s, well, it was after the dot-com crash.
Right.
And so it's maybe just the internet is useless and there's no point trying anything.
Yeah.
And then
there was Google.
Yeah, exactly. There was Google, and
Yeah.
I came here for Stripe in 2010, and all through the 2010, it was some combination of Google and Facebook and concerns there. But then also people were always, and you remember this, were always talking about the funding drying up and the bubble had to crash, and so, it always felt that we were kind of somehow on the precipice of disaster.
Right.
Then it's COVID, and now it's these AI labs, and obviously through the entirety of that almost now 50-year period, it's actually been empirically a really good time to start a company in that many amazing companies were started. And so not only do the current short-term trend lines seem incredibly favorable and encouraging, but I think if you just zoom out and take a sort of slightly longer snapshot of the history here, it's for more than a generation, betting on the side of entrepreneurship has been a pretty durable bet.
Yeah, and I think it might not be necessarily a bad thing for the world that there are less moats. It means there's more competition. Consumers generally
More consumer surplus.
More consumer surplus. I think that's generally a good thing. And again, I think Silicon Valley will be fine. I think the AI companies, the platforms that are starting here, I think perhaps Silicon Valley becomes more of a platform town rather than vertical SaaS or kind of point solution town, and then that sort of decentralizes and becomes available to more niche communities, and yoga practitioners in rural England will have an app for themselves, and that app is actually a real startup started by a founder on Replit that PG knows as well. But they're literally building a sort of a way to connect pop-up yoga instructors in rural England, and they're starting to make money. And yeah, if I am in a certain location, I might have an app just for that activity in that sort of location. And the entrepreneur building that is creating a community, is having fun, is having income. And I think that's like a really good thing.
I'm very bullish on yoga and yoga instructors through the singularity.
Yes.
And indeed, yoga software platforms.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Awesome.
This has
Thank
been
you so
fun.
much. Yeah, this is great. Appreciate it.